The sun was shining brightly over the beautiful landscape as Chester walked with a determined stride along the dusty path. He was pulling a small cart, looking quite focused on his mission, when Jane caught sight of him and called out in surprise, asking what he was doing. Chester stopped, wiped his brow, and replied with absolute certainty that he was taking her home. Jane blinked in confusion, asking what for, as she could not understand his sudden urgency. Chester smiled quite simply and explained that he wanted her to cook for him and take care of him from now on. Jane laughed out loud, asking if he was mad, but Chester merely shrugged and noted that he thought she was bored anyway. He added that her mother always wanted a big wedding, but if she insisted on being stubborn, Willie Lowe would hear about it. Jane shook her head with a gentle smile, telling him that she was awful sorry he got the wrong notion, Miss Jane. She explained very clearly that she simply did not have marriage in mind, and that it was just cooking and such chores that needed attention. Chester paused, realization dawning on him, and muttered that he finally understood. The truth of the matter was that Granny had not yet returned from Petticoat Junction, and young Ellie was trying her best to take her place in the kitchen. It was truly a pitiful sight to behold. A friend asked Chester how his Uncle Jed was managing with all of this. Chester sighed deeply, confessing that he had not seen much of him since Ellie commands cooking. He remarked that if his uncle had his own secret hiding places to avoid the food, he certainly had his own as well. Right at that moment, Uncle Jed himself was standing near the porch, looking quite busy. When asked what he was up to, Jed quickly claimed that he was just getting rid of a few of these ants here on the ground. He did not want to admit that he was avoiding the kitchen, saying that he would not say no to some help. Ellie then stepped out, looking very proud of her culinary creations, and noted that Jed had done a good job. She told him that as a reward, she was going to give him a double helping of what she had just cut inside. Jed looked at the plate with a look of pure dread, stammering that he did not think he was up to eating a full meal right now. He suggested with a hopeful tone that she could just heat him up a can of that fine tomato soup that was sitting right there in the cupboard. Ellie pouted, explaining that she had fixed him a special treat that she might just have all by myself, which she proudly called her surprise loaf. Jed groaned internally as she urged him to come on and eat. In a desperate bid to save himself, Jed quickly spoke up, saying that he just thought of something quite important. He asked her to guess who was going to be awful hurt if he ate without him. He said he would go find the boy right away. Ellie looked around and asked how he planned to do that, since Jethro was not even here. She mentioned that Jethro took the truck and left the house in a great hurry. Jed asked when exactly the boy did that. Ellie thought about it for a second and replied that she believed it was right after she told him she was going to cook a surprise loaf. Jed nodded knowingly, remarking that it was more than likely the reason for his sudden departure. Meanwhile, over at the local store, a phone call was being placed to locate the family matriarch. The operator was working hard to connect the lines. The man on the phone confirmed that the operator was absolutely right, and that she was currently staying at the Shady Rest Hotel in Petticoat Junction. He explained that the nearest phone to her was located at Sam Drucker's store in Hooterville. He listened patiently, saying words of agreement before thanking the operator and saying goodbye. He knew that this was the only way to get a message to Granny to come to town and call the family back in Beverly Hills. Not long after, Granny arrived at the store, her feet moving as fast as lightning. Sam Drucker looked up in absolute amazement, greeting her warmly. Granny greeted him right back, and Sam immediately asked how she managed to get there so very fast. Granny chuckled proudly, stating that she simply ran the whole way, noting that it was only 6 miles after all. Sam asked in disbelief why she did not catch the train instead. Granny grinned widely and replied that she actually did catch it, and in fact, she passed it on foot. Sam laughed and turned to his assistant, calling out to Sarah. He told Sarah that Granny was here now, so she could finally get a hold of that Beverly Hills operator and have her call them back right away. He thanked Sarah and then turned his attention back to the old lady, asking how Betty Joss' baby was doing. Granny beamed with pride, declaring that the little one was just fine and dandy now. Sam caught the hesitation in her voice and asked if something had been wrong. Granny looked at him seriously, stating that something was indeed wrong, and that what she had done for that baby was nothing short of a miracle, a true medical miracle. Sam was deeply curious and asked what was wrong and what she did to fix it. Granny shook her head solemnly, saying that she was sorry, but she could not tell him. She explained that doing so would be violating the confidence between the patient and the doctor. She expressed that she wished she could tell him, but given that she was a physician, her lips were sealed forever. She asked if he understood her position, and Sam nodded, saying that of course he did. Granny could not help but brag a little, adding that it was truly one doozy of a miracle. She hinted that if he were another doctor, she would be allowed to tell him everything. She asked Sam if he had ever been a doctor, to which Sam replied that he had not. She then asked if he had ever been a patient, and Sam answered yes. Granny gasped with delight, concluding that in that case, she would not be violating the confidence between the doctor and the patient at all. Granny leaned in close, whispering that in all her 60 years of doctoring, she had never been so shook up as she was the very first time she peeked into that crib and saw Betty Jo's baby. She claimed with absolute seriousness that it looked for all the world like an Airedale puppy. She exclaimed that Jake was alive, and she had always thought Chester was an ugly baby, but this was something else. Sam frowned, asking for clarification if she really meant it looked like an Airedale puppy. Granny confirmed it, adding that it was not even the pick of the litter. However, she proudly stated that she brought it back to normal with her special miracle medicine. Sam smiled gently, remembering something important, and pointed out that as he recalled, Granny had left her spectacles in Andy Partner's jitney, so it just could be that her eyes were playing tricks on her. Granny snapped back, asking if he really thought she needed those glasses. She claimed she had eyes like a hawk and only used the spectacles for professional reasons, because people simply do not trust a young-looking doctor. Just then, the telephone rang loudly in the store. Sam pointed out that he bet that was her call from Beverly Hills and offered to get it. He picked up the receiver and spoke into it, asking if Granny was there. Granny took another phone and shouted into it, asking who was talking. Sam, holding the first phone, told her that it was Sam Drucker speaking, but Granny argued that it could not be him because Sam Drucker was standing right there with her. Sam realized the confusion and told her that her other phone was ringing instead. He answered it, saying hello multiple times, before Sarah finally connected the right line. Sam called out to Granny, telling her that it was indeed her call from Beverly Hills. Granny, still annoyed, told Sam to take the phone and tell that smart aleck on the other end that it was strictly against the law to play pranks on doctors and firemen. Sam agreed to do that and spoke into the receiver. On the other end of the line, Jethro was holding the phone in Beverly Hills. He called out for Granny, but Sam told him to speak up because they had a very bad connection. In the background at the store, a dog was sniffing around the counter. Sam yelled at the dog, saying that he had strict orders from Sam not to let him loose in the store. He ordered the dog to come here right now, reminding the animal that last time it had gone through a whole sack of dog biscuits. Jethro, hearing the noise, kept saying hello until a man named Ernie helped clear the line. Jethro thanked Ernie, noting that it was a much better connection now. He then greeted Sam warmly. Granny finally took the phone and greeted Jethro, calling him a proud father. Jethro, thinking about his packages, asked Sam if those things had come in that they ordered for the baby. Sam confirmed that they were sitting in the back of the store. He then asked Jethro how Betty Jo was doing. Jethro replied that she was fine, but the baby had a very bad night. Sam asked why, and Jethro explained that the little one started howling about 3 this morning and kept it up until dawn. Granny listened to this and nodded wisely, declaring that it was good news because the little thing had simply reverted, suggesting that there must have been a full moon last night. Jethro started shouting her name through the phone, begging her to listen. Granny asked what he wanted, and Jethro pleaded with her, saying that she had to come home right away and cook for them because they needed her something desperate. Granny scoffed at the idea, stating that they were not nearly as desperate as the people where she was currently staying. She remarked that cooks were a dime a dozen in this world, but asked where the parents of that poor blighted baby could ever get another miracle-working doctor like herself. She then called out to a young girl named Kay, telling her to come on back here. Back at the house, The little baby was making a lot of noise. A young man commented that the little boomer might be homely, but it was definitely the fastest crawler he had ever seen in his life. Miss Jane, who had been listening to Jethro's complaints about the lack of good food, smiled and said that she believed she had the perfect solution to his food problem. She explained that there was a wonderful employment agency in town where a person could hire maids, cooks, and all kinds of domestic help. Jethro was absolutely overjoyed, telling Miss Jane that he believed she had just saved his life. He asked how he could ever thank her enough for her kindness. Miss Jane, feeling poetic, quoted a line saying that with hugs and kisses, debts are paid, and when settling scores, one must fix man and maid. Jethro laughed happily, calling her a sly dog and promising that he would be absolutely sure to hire a very pretty cook for the house. A short while later, Jethro returned to the mansion, practically bursting with excitement. He ran through the doors, calling out for his Uncle Jed. He passed through the grand rooms, muttering to himself about how wonderful real soul food was going to taste. He kept calling for Uncle Jed until Jed answered from the kitchen, telling the boy that he was right out here. Jethro marched in and announced that he had the biggest surprise of the day. Jed looked up tiredly, saying that he did not think he could stay in another surprise today. Jethro grinned and told him to just wait until he saw her. Jed caught the word and asked in surprise who she was. Jethro explained that Miss Jane had sent him to an employment agency, and he had successfully hired them an imported cook, direct from the country of Italy. Jed nodded thoughtfully and told the boy to fetch her in. Jethro warned his uncle that she did not speak much English, but bragged that he had already learned how to speak Italian himself. Jed was skeptical, asking if he learned it just today. Jethro defended himself, reminding Jed that he had to remember that this was the brain of a sixth grader they were talking about. He told Jed to watch closely as he called her into the room, using genuine Italian words. Jethro cleared his throat and yelled out, calling her a bambina and telling her to bring herself to the kitchen. He turned to Jed and whispered that kitchen was the authentic Italian word for kitchen. He praised the young woman as she walked in, noting that she picked up those 4 languages just like that. He asked his uncle if she was not truly something special. Jed looked at the young woman and agreed that she was a mighty pretty girl, then asked if she could really cook well. Jethro assured him that victuals were absolutely all she thinks about. He decided to demonstrate his new language skills and greeted her with a loud howdy. The young woman smiled sweetly and replied with the word ciao. Jethro looked at Jed triumphantly, pointing out that she must have mentioned ciao at least a dozen times today already. Jethro then introduced her, saying, "Signor Maria, this here is my Uncle Jed." Jed tipped his hat and gave her a warm howdy. Maria smiled again and said ciao. Jethro gestured wildly, noting that there she went again with the Italian words. Maria then spoke a long sentence in her native tongue, explaining that it would be a pleasure to work for them as a cook and that she hoped they would like her food. Jed looked completely blank and asked Jethro what she had just said. Jethro hesitated, confessing that he was not too sure because he did not understand Italian quite as well as he talked it. Jed decided to be hospitable anyway, telling the young lady that they were mighty pleased to have her here in their home. Maria bowed slightly and said grazie, adding that the home was bellissimo. Jed smiled, remarking that it was a mighty pretty name she had. Jethro laughed and corrected him, saying that that was not her name at all, but was probably the name of something delicious she was going to cook for them later. Just then, Ellie walked into the kitchen. Jed called her over, telling her to come on over and meet this lovely young lady. Jethro introduced them, saying, "Signor Maria, this here is my cousin Ellie." Ellie gave a friendly howdy, and Maria responded with her usual ciao. Ellie looked at her with a bit of suspicion, observing that the girl truly did have victuals on her mind. Jethro was excited, declaring that she was going to cook them up a storm. Ellie felt a bit defensive about her own skills and asked what exactly was wrong with her own cooking. Jethro looked at Jed nervously, asking his uncle if he should be the one to tell her. Jed quickly stepped in, telling Jethro that he better let him handle it. Jed turned to Ellie and assured her that her cooking was truly in a class by itself and that absolutely nobody could touch it. He said that it was the absolute truth, but explained that this young lady was brand new to their country and simply needed all the experience she could get. Ellie softened up, saying that that was fine with her and that she would gladly learn the girl how to make her famous surprise loaf. Jed shuddered at the memory, stating that he believed he had a whole loaf on that first time and did not need another. He then suggested that Ellie take the young lady up to her room and help her get comfortable. Ellie agreed happily, telling her father that it was a good idea. She called out to Senior Maria to follow her, saying that they would see the men later for chow. Maria nodded and said ciao once more as they left. Jed turned to Jethro and asked why he did that gesture with his hands. Jethro admitted that it meant something important in Italian, though he did not know exactly what, but noted that all the people do it. Jed nodded, saying that he understood. Jethro then grabbed her bags, saying he would tote her suitcases up to the room, while wondering to himself what he had just said in Italian. Far away in a cozy home, a young husband named Steve walked through the front door, greeting his wife with a warm "Hi, honey." Betty Jo smiled up at him, replying with a sweet "Hi, darling." Steve held up some packages, noting that he had successfully got the new nursing bottles from the store. He then asked how the baby was doing after their long night. Betty Jo sighed with relief, saying that the little one was sleeping, thank goodness. Just then, their pet dog trotted into the room. Steve looked down and greeted the animal, calling it a hello boy. However, he quickly warned his wife that he wouldn't hold the dog right now because he thought the poor thing had fleas again. Betty Jo frowned, asking if he was serious. Steve confirmed it, remembering that there was still some of that insect repellent that Granny had brewed up before she left. Betty Jo laughed, recalling that it was what Granny proudly calls her miracle medicine. Steve smiled and suggested that they give Granny's cure another try on the dog. He walked toward the back room, and Betty Jo asked if he needed some help with the task. Steve insisted that she stay put, telling her to sit right there because she had a very rough night with the baby. A few moments later, Granny herself walked into the house, looking energized. She greeted Betty Jo, calling her a hello, little mama. Betty Jo was surprised and greeted her back. Granny mentioned that she had heard from the store that they had a very bad night last night. Betty Jo confirmed that they did, explaining that she thought it was a case of colic. Granny, whose hearing was not perfect, blinked and asked if she had said colic or collie. Betty Jo clarified that she definitely said colic. Granny nodded, then looked around and asked if her husband had got home with the little fellow yet. Betty Jo was confused by the question and answered yes, then asked Granny if she was not with him on the train ride back. Granny explained that she was not, because she had cut through the deep woods to look for some fresh roots and some wild herbs. She stated that she needed to brew up another fresh batch of her miracle medicine as soon as possible. Betty Jo pointed out that there was actually still some left from the old batch, mentioning that Steve had just gone into the other room to use it on the little flea trap. Granny gasped in horror, telling her not to call that precious little darling a flea trap. Betty Jo laughed it off, explaining that she called him all kinds of funny things, but assured her that she truly loved the little mutt. Granny looked at her with a mixture of pity and admiration, remarking that there was one thing about the young people of today, and that was that they certainly had the courage to face the truth. She recalled that back in her day, they would have kept him hidden upstairs in a dark room with the shades drawn tightly. Betty Jo looked shocked, saying she would never do that because she thought he was absolutely cute. Granny smiled warmly, noting that there was nothing mightier in this world than the power of mother love. Granny then sat down next to her and told Betty Jo to sit down as well, because she wanted to talk to her seriously about her family plan. She asked if she and her husband had thought about having any more young ones in the future. Betty Jo answered with enthusiasm, saying that yes, they definitely wanted to have a large family. Granny looked astonished, asking if they still wanted that in spite of what had happened last night with the howling. Betty Jo smiled and said that of course they did, noting that a person cannot expect a baby to be absolutely perfect all the time. Granny shook her head, muttering that they do not have to miss being perfect by that much of a margin. Betty Jo continued, saying that the way she and Steve felt, they honestly wanted to have a dozen more young ones just like the very first one. Granny looked terrified, warning her that courage was one thing, but absolute foolishness was another. Betty Jo chuckled and admitted that she guessed a dozen was a bit of an exaggeration. Granny felt relieved, calling her a good girl. Betty Jo then suggested that they would like at least 4 or 5 children. Granny nodded in agreement, telling her that now she was finally heading in the right direction. Just then, Steve walked back into the room, holding the freshly cleaned pet. He smiled and told them to look who was ready for a nice stroll outside. Granny looked at the dog and asked if her miracle medicine had worked. Steve smiled widely, confirming that it sure did and that she had done it again. Granny beamed, proud of her medical skills. Suddenly, a man came bursting through the door, out of breath. He called out for Granny, announcing that a very important telegram had just come for her. Granny looked at him up and down, asking how on earth he got here so fast. The man wiped his forehead, explaining that he had pumped out all the way on a small railroad handcar. He turned to Sam, who had followed him, and told him that they needed to start pumping